Good afternoon, everybody. I welcome everyone to come take a seat. We have some empty seats over here and maybe one in the front. Welcome, welcome. We realized we could not compete with the World Cup game, so thank you for your patience. I'm so excited to see this group here. So we have a great event planned today. You can see the title up here, Delivering Action and Impact for Wildlife, Landscapes, and People. My name is Hannah Fairbanks, and I'm the Asia Regional Coordinator for the GEF Secretariat and a Senior Biodiversity Specialist. And today we have two panels that will be focused on three main components of the GEF 6 and GEF 7 Global Wildlife Program, or GWP. Those are combating illegal wildlife trade, building human and wildlife coexistence, and maximizing benefits and opportunities from wildlife-based economies. And we'll also give you a little bit of a preview to our GEF 8 Wildlife Conservation for Development Integrated Program. I have some flyers up here. There are a few in the crowd. Please take one afterwards, and you can also find more information online. There are flyers with a QR code just in the front. So we have a great lineup of speakers. I will take no more time, but it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Valerie Hickey, who's the Director of Environment, Natural Resources, and Blue Economy of the World Bank, one of my favorite all-time speakers. Take it away, Valerie. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And my heart goes out to any English fans in the audience. And yay, France! I'll get in trouble. And the Brazilians, of course. That was yesterday's sympathies we all shared. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us at this event today. The Global Wildlife Program is one of our favorite programs at the World Bank because it does two things that are so important. It doesn't just defend biodiversity, which is key. It does development, which is equally key. At the end of the day, we at the World Bank, we're a poverty institution. Our job is to end poverty. And right now, our job is harder than it's ever been. In the last 2 years, 70 million more people are living in extreme poverty. There's 220 million people who are on the brink of famine in 53 countries. It's not just that they're hungry. It's not just that they only have one meal a day. They have no meals a day. Think about that in 2022. We're also living in a world where, because of COVID, there's 30 million more people without access to electricity. So 30 million people, that's tens of millions of families whose kids used to be able to come home and do homework because they could turn on a light, who are now living in the dark in 2022. And the reason we think we're losing the development trajectory we're on, that we're losing the hard-won development gains of the last 40 years, we think there's three reasons. COVID, climate change, and conflict. And in each one of these, illegal wildlife trade, wildlife crime, is at the center of it. COVID, we don't know where COVID comes from, but we know the next pandemic is going to come at the arc of deforestation. It's going to come from somebody stealing wildlife, taking it to a wildlife market and introducing that disease. So if we're going to reduce pandemics, we have to get a handle on wildlife crime. Climate change. We all talk about nature-based solutions. We just had a fantastic event here talking about the Amazon a couple of hours ago. Just in the first 6 months of this year in the Amazon, thousands of square kilometers of timber was cut illegally. So much so that the Amazon, which used to be able to absorb 5% of global emissions every year, isn't absorbing any. And that's just 1 6-month period. If we don't get a handle on illegal environmental crime, we're not going to get a handle on climate change. And conflict. Between 1946, so the end of the Second World War, and 2010, 40%, almost half of all conflict was either caused by, made worse by, or funded by wildlife crime. My favorite example, I don't want to use the term favorite, is the horrible, terrible civil war in Mozambique between 1977 and 1992, funded by the ivory trade. That war would not have gone on so long. It probably wouldn't have started if not for the illegal ivory trade. And that's what GWP is doing. GWP has drawn a line in the sand, led by countries, because the value of GWP is not a World Bank initiative. It's not a GEF initiative that we the financing. This is a country initiative to draw a line in the sand to say enough. But what makes GWP especially special, is that it doesn't just go on the defense. Like every good soccer team, every good football team, defense isn't enough, you need a good offense. And that means we have to show communities, companies, and countries that nature is an engine for development. That nature can deliver jobs, it can deliver GDP, it can deliver welfare gains. That the bioeconomy, the nature-positive economy, the eco-economy, the regular economy is built on nature. And we can help communities and countries understand that they can make the same money, they can build a better path out of poverty by sustainably working with nature, not through illegal wildlife crime. And that's what's so special about GWP, working with partners, having a balance between the defensive and drawing a line in the sand to stop wildlife crime from crime scene to courthouse steps, working with partners, but then also showing a different path so that we're not criminalizing the poor who live with wildlife and who often have no choice but to illegally take that wildlife to put food on the table or to make money to put their kids in school. It's our job to make sure they have options, that instead of criminalizing what they have to do out of poverty, we allow natural capital to be a sustainable, resilient, and inclusive path out of poverty. I'm super excited. We're super proud to be part of this partnership with the GF, with all of our partners led by countries doing your bidding, and super excited to listen to this event today. So with that, I hand back to Hannah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Valerie, for that rousing kickoff. So I just wanted to pause quickly to say Adriana Moreira, my colleague here in the front row, is the lead for the GEF Secretariat of the Global Wildlife Program. I'm co-leading that. And in GEF 8, the Wildlife for Conservation Development Integrated Program will be co-led by the two of us. It is my distinct pleasure to turn the mic over to Lisa Farroway, who is the program manager for the Global Wildlife Program at the World Bank and a co-conspirator to do great things with GWP. We're super excited to have you. Thank you so much, Lisa. Take it away.
Thank you, Hannah. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. So on the first slide, you saw our excellent partners. And now on the screen here, you can see the engine room of the GWP. This is where the rubber hits the road. This is where the magic happens. And the GWP exists because these 31 countries here, 18 in Africa, 10 in Asia, and 3 in Latin America, they made the choice, they made the decision to use their GEF biodiversity allocation to combat illegal wildlife trade, to build human-wildlife coexistence, and promote wildlife-based economies. So it's very much a country-driven program. And I also want to recognize anyone from the GWP community that's joining online today. Thank you for joining us. This second slide shows the breadth of effort that's happening across of the GWP. It started in 2015 with a focus on combating illegal wildlife trade, poaching, trafficking, and demand. And you can see this reflected on the screen here. The 4 pillars or different threads of work across the GWP. First, protection of wildlife and their habitats, including from the threat of poaching. So we see a range of site-based action, including effort at over 130 protected and conserved areas. So far, over 40 sites that are globally significant for biodiversity have enhanced anti-poaching initiatives. And half of those have shown a decline in poaching. So this is incredible effect happening across the GWP. Second, it's combating trafficking across countries and across regions for those countries that are involved in illegal wildlife trade. And this is happening through enhanced law enforcement, strengthened policies, legal frameworks, and criminal justice systems. So across the GWP so far, over 10,000 law enforcement officials have been trained in combating wildlife crime. There's been over 13 national law enforcement coordination mechanisms established. So this is getting police, customs, and wildlife management authorities to work together to see what they need to do to combat wildlife crime. Third, reducing demand for illegal wildlife products. This has been an area of reduced less funding across the entire program, but it's a very important area. As I'm sure as everyone here knows, a key part of combating this crime is to stop the demand. And there are some very good initiatives happening within the GWP, and importantly, an increasing interest in using behavior change approaches, including applying those to issues other than consumer demand. And finally, and this is as Valerie introduced, the defensive and the offense. Building wildlife-based economies and recognizing the benefits that can flow to local communities and economies from healthy wildlife populations. The flip side of this is recognizing that communities that live close to protected areas and close to these wildlife populations that support nature-based tourism, they bear the costs of conservation through human-wildlife conflict. So it's important to recognize there are benefits and costs from wildlife populations, and both of those are covered under the GWP. Today, we're going to touch on all of these threads, starting with the defensive, a short panel on that, and then we're going to go across to the offensive. The GEF 8 Wildlife Conservation for Development Integrated Program is going to touch on all of these pillars. It's going to broaden further to look at the potential risk of zoonotic spillover from interactions between wildlife, livestock, and people. But all of these areas you see within the Wildlife Conservation for Development program because of the recognized links between wildlife and development. Finally, the role of the World Bank as the lead agency is to support knowledge exchange across the entire program. All we do, we put the frame in place for all the experts within the program, all of the countries, to talk to each other and share their knowledge and expertise, and it's our pleasure to do so. And with that, I'd like to introduce up our first two speakers for our first panel. So Martin and Sydney, if you'd like to come up and join, please. So this is our defense. So we're going to start by talking about some of these serious and evolving threats to wildlife, looking at illegal wildlife trade and human-wildlife conflict. We've got joining us Sydney Nkosi, Chief Director of Protected Areas at the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment from South Africa. And we've got Martin Kaseona, Deputy Director of Central Regions from the Ministry of Environment, Forestry and Tourism in Namibia. So thank you both for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we're going to start with illegal wildlife trade, which, as I said, was the initial basis of the Global Wildlife Program. It was established in 2015. This was coming on the back of the rapid escalation of poaching in species like African elephants, rhinoceros, around 2011. But there's been some interesting trends, some positive trends since then. So the most recent poaching estimate for Africa is the lowest since 2003. So if you look at the data that's coming out, this is through CITES MIC program on the level of poaching on African elephants, is that it's declined and it's continuing to drop. And poaching of rhinoceros has also declined since 2011, as have the prices paid for tusks and horns. So we want to start there and say, so Sydney, many countries have been successful at reducing poaching of these flagship species. What has been your experience in South Africa, and what would you say has been most effective at combating poaching and trafficking in South Africa.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and good afternoon to everyone. I hope the soccer results didn't dampen the spirits for today's discussions as well. Maybe where one will start is that, within the South African context, we had to do a really stock taking to check what is the cause of all the problematic issues that we face with in the context of South Africa. And one thing that you find as a common thread is that most of the communities that borders these protected areas, there are challenging social, political, economic issues. People who are forcefully removed from their ancestral lands. People don't have any interactions with the space at all. And that results to unemployment and other social ills. So that analysis of the problem gave us an idea to say, maybe we need to change our approach in terms of making people or taking people at the center of everything, so that people, when all their social, economic needs are addressed, will see a decline in terms of those. And we have seen the figures and speaking to that. And the one dramatic issue that we recently have was we looked at the data pre-COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID. And you could actually pick up the trends during the COVID itself, that there was some level of desperation from people to ensure that they sustain themselves. And you see a spike in terms of that. But what we have done as a country in a very systematic way, of course, with the support of the GEF 7 and 8 programs in terms of intervention, was to look at outside of the protected areas, where are the strongholds where we can take some of the species that are being threatened so that they can regenerate the heads on those particular ones. And one iconic species that comes to mind is the rhino within the South African context. And we are doing that. The second part that we've done is to look at supporting what we called a wildlife economy, because that interaction of people should see the use and need and associate an interface with the space that is actually just around their backyard. And we said there must be a what we call wildlife economy programs that we support so that people see the need and benefit out of that. But the biggest element that we have actually concluded was to look at what the land that belongs to the communities around to be included as part of the land under conservation, under co-management agreements and a beneficiation scheme. And we have seen that also, producing the desired results in terms of the various levels of poachings on certain things. But key as well, stakeholder engagement, so that the people that are around these spaces are also active participants and to take decisions on some of the aspects that we are faced with. And we do have a program that is run nationally. We call it Peoples and Parks. They are quite active in the space to ensure that communities that live in around these protected areas are part of the ecosystem of these protected areas. Thank you, Liz.
To dampen spirits in the GWP. I don't know if we're the best GEF program, but I will say we are the program that has the most fun. So that's one I'll definitely say that we have. But I think Sydney's remarks showed, how all of these threads come together. And it's even impossible to separate the defense and the offense. And you can see for an integrated program that, a number of countries may be interested in working on against a number of these pillars. But the other thing I wanted to ask you, Sydney, was, these threats are evolving, so they're not staying static. So while I mentioned that poaching of elephant and rhinoceros has declined, in parallel trafficking of pangolin scales has increased markedly. You see geographic displacement from countries to those that have lower law enforcement or gaps in their laws. You see product replacement. some of wildlife crime is by organized criminals, and they're smart, so they're shifting their approaches. And with COVID-19, we saw a shift from physical to online markets. So Sydney, I wanted to ask you, what shifts are you seeing in illegal wildlife trade in South Africa? And what do you think needs to be done in response to those shifts?
What our observations were is that the syndicates are becoming more and more sophisticated. And how do we then match the sophistication of those syndicates? Was to also double our efforts in terms of security measures, the use of technology, the visibility around the parks, but also the users of the spaces also contribute towards alerting the state where there are illegal or any activities that are suspicious. And I think that has assisted us in terms of dealing with all these trafficking or wildlife crimes that we have seen in our spaces. But what the shift that we have seen and observing as well, one will normally think your iconic species like the rhino, the elephant, are the ones that are in demand. But we have seen poaching of flora as well in terms of certain biomes, the succulent. And it's an emerging trend that we are observing closely, and it's a quite difficult one to manage because whatever you've confiscated, you can't put it in storage. You need to build the necessary infrastructure to ensure that there are nurseries to what has been recovered so that it can be reintroduced lately to those affected biomes. And part of that problem as well, I wouldn't say a problem, but an agreement and understanding with the users of traditional medicine. We've concluded some of the agreements with them, the stakeholders, as key to ensure that their interface with the space is also controlled and managed, but also extend to say where there's a demand of some of the medicinal plants, we need to provide the infrastructure in terms of nurseries that are run by communities to ensure that they do continue to have access. And we respect that particular space. With the countries that are the users, the demand countries, we have also concluded some treaties with those particular countries that demand some of these products from the wildlife space. But the other thing that, my 101 economics says, if there's a huge demand, you flood the market with a commodity so that you bring down the prices, but also bring down the demand. I'm not sure. In the space, is it applicable? I think it's one element that we need to consider because there's quite a number of stockpiles sitting with a number of countries, and we need to consider how do we then, in a sustainable way, use that or dispose of that, but in a correct and acceptable way within the prescripts, obviously, of the international as well as the national legislation. Thank you.
Thanks, Sydney. And I think that shows that while South Africa's had great success, this threat is evolving and continually changing. And if you look at the GEF 8 program, you see that in the way the program has evolved. So while GWP started, it was about international trafficking of ivory from African elephants and rhinoceros horn. If you look at GEF 8, it's recognizing a legal trade that's domestic and international. It's looking beyond flagship species. And it's also looking at trade that could be high health risk. So where are the wildlife products or species that could lead to zoonotic spillover risk, whether it's legal or illegal? And from this, I want to now jump to another threat that is a few months before the CITES COP. The CITES Secretariat held a regional workshop for African elephant range states on sustainable financing for elephant conservation. And I had the pleasure to join this meeting online and listening to the African elephant range states each talk about their priorities. So many of them talked about their successes in reducing poaching, and then they talked about the increasing threat that they have from human-elephant conflict. That, the elephant populations have risen, but now there's serious and increasing human-wildlife conflict. And that's the next one that we wanted to talk about. And we're lucky to have Martin joining us from Namibia, which is a great example of a country that's looking at all the different angles of human-wildlife conflict. So social, ecological, community, and political. So Martin, what can you tell us about trends of human-wildlife conflict in Namibia? What are you learning about the drivers of human-wildlife conflict interactions, and how are they evolving?
Thank you very much. I think before I start, we know the broad terminologies or definition of human-wildlife conflict. I have two. I will just say the first one. The second one, I will say it later. Normally, human-wildlife conflict is referred to as a negative interaction between humans and wildlife, whether it's for resource or whether it's for the habitats. Now, we know we are coming from CITES. What normally happens is from at the community level, we have some mechanism how we assess and look at trends in terms of the human-wildlife conflict. We have over 80 conservancies, and all the 80 conservancies have what we call event book system, where every day as they are walking, they record what they see, whether it's spores, whether it's animals, and also the incidents of those animals are being recorded, whether it's a hyena, whether it's a cheetah, whether it's a lion, it's recorded. Then we have another system, which we call it human-wildlife conflict self-reliance scheme, which is a compensation scheme. So for you to be paid, there should be some kind of verification which is in place. That means all this information are documented from the grassroots level by community game cards that are kind of like the committee of the conservancies before it gets transformed and documented very well and sent to for compensation purposes. So this is also complemented by the government, where together with NGOs and local peoples, they do an annual game count. So we look at all these trends, and that is why it's not a thumbs-up thing. That is why we keep saying there is a huge increase in human-wildlife conflict. Now, you look at why human-wildlife conflict. Of course, I think before independence we were 1 million, 1.2. I think we are looking at 2.5 now million. We are getting there. It's not what we want, because we know as we are going up, the population is also, wildlife population is all going up because of course, because of good conservation and also because of space. Now, every country wants to feed its nation, so there is also a demand to change some of the area you convert, some of the area you try to promote self-sustainability. We know about COVID. You want some of the rural people to have sustainable farming, whether it's by crops or whether it's livestock. Of course, the area becomes smaller and the conflict increases. So there is also provision whereby that is some of the drivers. Everybody wants to conserve, but when you are conserving within a space, the space doesn't increase. The population increase, the wildlife increases. So what matters is now a confrontation. And through these drivers, we realize because of that, the population increase, there is a demand. You try to go further in some areas, you drill boreholes and let the people stay here, and so that the animals can at least move on the other side. So in theory it worked, but in practicality, when drought hit, the rural community was desperate to save some of their livestock. They realized there's a boreholes on the other side. Why don't we just go and settle there for a while, because it seems there is enough grazing. So with all this, and those who are neighboring the parks, of course, they act as a buffer, but again, the conflict comes in. So because of that, in short, I can almost say we can acquire land from elsewhere with the population increasing. There is pressure for the country to feed its people. There is also, of course, also pressure for us to maintain the population of wildlife. And as my colleague said, but we have to balance the two. And I think from the trends, from data that we capture, and from the drivers that we have that is driving this, I think we have to kind of get the balance of the two in such a way that we don't end up with a population that is killing wildlife indiscriminately. You want people to view animals as part of ownership, which they are doing now, but for how long, that is a different question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. And for explaining how, the importance of land use planning and how decisions are made about sharing land. But the other thing I think that's critical about human-wildlife conflict, this is not a conservation issue. This is a development issue, because it's not just about retaliatory killing and the fact that a lion may be killed. It's about the impacts that happen to communities and to a range of different sectors, including sometimes death. So now, Martin, I wanted to talk to you a bit about the impacts. So tell us about your experience in Namibia. Who is most affected by human-wildlife conflict? And how do you work with different sectors and stakeholders? And Namibia is one of only a few countries to have a national human-wildlife conflict policy. So I'm interested to hear how that policy might help you engage this range of different sectors and stakeholders.
It's most of animals that are inside protected area, in theory, they are safe. Of course, we know there is poaching everywhere. Now, the rest of the animals, Namibia is known like 90% of free roaming cheetahs. We have, before independence, from 10, 20 lions to 130 in some of the areas. You have from 30 elephants to 1,000 something in desert elephants. Now, all these animals and many more, they are in rural areas. So these are people that are constantly in conflict with wildlife. You send a child to the river to fetch water, they come running. Then you say, what is happening? There is an elephant at the river. You said you can pull the sand and throw it like this. If the wind direction is going this way, just go the wind direction. If it is on top there, it's not going to smell you. The visibility is not that so good, and you go and fetch the water. But who decides when that elephant must live or die? Is not somebody who is there, it's somebody who is sitting in the aircon. So how we engage with other stakeholders, and especially it was made easy by the national policy, because the way the government at least made a very good move in 2009, they approved what we call human-wildlife conflict management and mitigation policy. So this policy dictates that all relevant stakeholders must ensure that they include, they make sure that they include human-wildlife conflict within their planning system. The policy itself, of course, as a standalone, will not have teeth. Therefore, Environmental Management Act requires that all stakeholders, when they are doing any development project, they consider human-wildlife conflict, human-wildlife impacts, particularly human-wildlife conflict. Of course, it has a detailed list. It also prescribes the issue of compensation, the step that you have to take to do verification. Also the costing, the compensation per livestock. You can't come and you say your bull cost X amount of money and the cow costs this amount of money at the commercial level. All of them, they got the same price. The difference is just in species. The pig cannot cost the same as a horse, but it doesn't matter whether the other one was young or the other one was a bull or whatever. This is within a prescribed compensation set prices. Of course, we know that we can't compensate for human life, but of course, just to offset or assist the bereaved family, we pay 100,000. If a person is permanently disabled, it's around 50,000 Namibian dollar, not US dollar. So then you have all these guidelines that you have to follow in. It's not cast in stone. That's why it was done in 2009 and it was reviewed in 2018, simply because there is a lot of things that you have to counter. Now, one of the challenges is, imagine yourself, you are a 70 or 80-year-old granny, and your goat who goes to the Zambezi River or any river close there, the crocodile pulls that goat into the river. The game guards have to come and verify. And you are standing there, you are saying, my son, my goat was there. The crocodiles are gone. The blood is gone. And then I have to justify so that I go and get my compensation. So it's one of those challenges that we have. What was your measure? I did apply my measure, or you used chili bombs. I know we got it from Zambia, from Zimbabwean colleagues. When you put it, the wind changes direction, the elephant comes from the other side, and by the time the chili is turning around for them to start smoking, they have already done. There is all these challenges, but the policy is there as a guideline, but you have to play also with a bit of flexibility, because otherwise you are sitting with a situation where your community will not. But I think because is a guideline and it cut off, there is certain things that you can, of course, have to alleviate, like snakes. We don't compensate if somebody dies from snakes. And I think the existence of that policy makes sure that sometimes you don't use your emotions to kind of compensate. There's issues sometimes, if you find a very young child and the parents are crying, and then it's a snake bite, cobra snakes bite the child dies. And if you don't have a policy, then you will go like, okay, let's help. But if you have it there, then you just look at it and you say, unfortunately, somehow we have to stick to this. So these are basically what we are doing. And so far, we can't say it's bulletproof, but it's something to start with, and it's something that we are proud of. Thank you.
And I think that shows the complexity of the issue and how these threats are both evolving, sometimes increasing, sometimes declining, but shows the links to development. And on that, I want to thank our defense here. So get everyone to give a round of applause to Sydney and Martin. And now we're going to do a changeover from the defense to the offense. Valerie, you've set the scene for the whole event here. So it's my pleasure to introduce our dear colleague, Adriana Moreira, who's Senior Biodiversity Specialist at GEF Secretariat and focal point for GWP and Wildlife Conservation for Development Program.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
I'll put on the next one for you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Lisa. Pleasure to be with all of you here today. I'm also the regional coordinator for Latin America. We engage in Latin America more and more in the GWP program. I was glad to see the jaguar picture there, very nice. And I have the pleasure to invite the next panel. I have Urvashi Narain. Urvashi is a lead economist at the World Bank. And Ramli Hamad. Hamad is an ecologist at the Sarawak Forestry Corporation in Malaysia. Hamli, please come over. And as Lisa was saying, we're going to look. Thank you so much for joining us. Here's your microphone. Wow. Okay. Managed to do that. This panel is about how, we secure benefits for the people, for the local communities and landscape from this rich wildlife that many of our countries share. Urvashi, you have led a groundbreaking study, co-financing by GWP on nature-based tourism globally. So, and this is one of the tools that we have for maximizing the benefits and opportunities for wildlife-based economies, for building these economies. So how can we, this nature benefit tourism supports protected areas and communities? What were your findings? What did need to make the case to invest? How can we make the case, and particularly in this conference, in this COP that we are discussing so much, target 3, increasing the area under protection globally. So enlighten us on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adriana, and really it's a pleasure to be here. This study was co-financed, of course, by GWP, but also by the World Bank, by our pro-green and pro-blue trust funds. So nature-based tourism, right? This is a key part of our offense. because if done well, if planned well, if managed well, it is a way to provide economic development on the basis of biodiversity protection, right? So we did a study a few years ago. Last year we released a study, Banking on Protected Areas, promoting sustainable protected area tourism for the benefits of local communities. And in that, we of course documented tourism. How does it benefit protected areas? First and foremost, it generates revenue. As we know, from visitors coming to these protected areas, they pay fees. Those fees often can go towards the protection of these areas. We also have permit fees, you have concessions. These are different ways in which tourism contributes to revenue generation for the protected area. And this is commonly known, and this is something we show. But I think equally importantly, what we showed in our study was that public investment in protected areas makes good economic sense. It's good for conservation, but also good for development. And the mechanism through which public investment provides a significant return is through tourism. So in this report, we looked at 4 different case studies: Zambia, Nepal, Fiji, and Brazil. So 2 terrestrial and 2 marine protected areas. And we showed that the return to every dollar that the government invests in protected areas is between $6 to $28, right? A government can get $6 for an investment or $28. $28 may be a little high, but that's probably because there's not sufficient investment going into that protected area. But nonetheless, it makes the case that these protected areas are not just good for conservation, they're good for development. And that governments should see protected areas as part of the natural capital that can generate economic return, that can generate development. And therefore, tourism can benefit protected areas by making this case. Now, how does it benefit local communities? We also showed in this study that $1 that a tourist spends in protected area tourism generates between $1.5 to $1.8 for the local community, right? So, and this is because of direct tourism benefits. So, tourists come, they pay fees, they stay in a hotel, they go to restaurants. But that kind of economic activity generates even more economic activity because the hotels will employ locals from the economy. They will source goods from the local economy. And all of this generates further economic activity. And we estimated this multiplier and found that there's significant local linkages. We also found that it generates significant jobs. In Lower Zambezi National Park, in South Luangwa National Park, we found between 15 to 30% of the working age population is employed in nature-based tourism, whether directly or indirectly. Right? We found the same kind of trends in marine and coastal tourism. And what we found was that these benefits are broad. Both poor and non-poor households benefit. We also found that the households directly involved in tourism benefit, but also households who are not necessarily directly involved in tourism. So basically, we showed that well-managed, well-planned tourism in protected areas is good for economic development. Now, how do we make the case? We need more of these kinds of studies. Right? We started this because the US National Park came to the World Bank to make a presentation, again with GWP seminar, and we were kind of blown away. They said that the US government invests $3 billion every year in national parks. But the US National Park shows that they generate $20 billion in benefits for the local economy. So they can make the case to the US Congress that give us $3 billion because we give you $20 billion in return. And the more of this kind of evidence we can generate, the more we can convince policymakers to invest in these precious resources that are very important for economic development.
Thank you so much, Uvarsha. This is amazing information. I'm totally in favor of expanding this. And you know, this might be one of the best uses of taxpayer money that we have heard, you know, because we are protecting nature, securing, you know, impacts of climate change, and you know, delivering strong results in revenues. And also, you know, the combination with the private sector investment that I think it's also something that for us to look for. So what you say, continue on this, in this dialogue, where the key elements that countries that are interested in this approach should keep in mind when they keep investing on this nature-based tourism. But I want you to contextualize this within this COVID crisis, because we actually saw in Africa a big decline. We're coming back, thank God, you know, but what we learned from COVID, you know. Thank you.
You know, as part of this study, we first of all, you know, helped to generate the evidence, but we also spent a fair amount of time understanding how can countries promote nature-based tourism. And we find that there's 3 principles that countries should follow for to promote tourism that benefits local communities, that also is responsible so it doesn't lead to the deterioration of the very asset on which it is built. So the 3 principles are, first and foremost, protect the asset. Because if the protected area is not well managed, if you are not securing the wildlife populations, right, the tourists will not come. That's what they come for. If your landscape is not pristine and not degraded, tourists will not come. So first and foremost, you have to protect this asset. And there's many things you can do to do that. Of course, formalization of protected areas, but also co-management of other areas, adequate financing for protected areas, because the best indicator of a healthy protected area is finance for that protected area. You need to create capacity of park managers to both manage the protected area, the wildlife, but also to manage the tourism offerings. And then you need to do more of this evidence generation that I referred to, because that will also help you plan where are the tourists going, where can I improve my offerings, and use that data not just to make the case for investment, but also to improve your tourism. So first and foremost, protect the asset. The second thing we learned is to grow to grow and diversify the business. I think this is really important. We've just recently done an assessment of World Bank projects in this area, and we find that sometimes there's a tendency to build or to support some tourism activities as part of protected area management, but not to really understand the market, right? Tourists want good services. Tourists want to come to relax. They want to have a good time, right? So if the offering that you're giving them is not of high quality, you're not going to see tourists come. And you will not generate income if tourists don't come. So growing and diversifying your business and really bringing excellent services in the tourism sector is really important. And diversifying is important because revenue is generated when tourists stay for many days. If the tourists only are day tourists, you're not going to see a lot of revenue generated for your protected area. You need tourists to come and stay for many days. And that happens if there's many different offerings. And the final piece is sharing the benefit with local communities. This can be done through sharing of revenues. It can be done because local communities are the enterprises that provide the tourism offerings. It can be done because there's employment. Local guards often are employed from the local communities, right? So those are the 3 critical pieces. Now, coming quickly to COVID. Now, COVID, of course, really had an impact on the tourism sector. It's probably the economic sector that was the most affected by COVID. And it also had an impact because it reduced the revenue for a number of these protected areas. But I think there was a sort of a side benefit in the sense there was an ability for these protected areas, at least some of them that see maybe too many tourists, to have a bit of a recovery as well. But nonetheless, I think COVID showed that it's important to have diversified revenue sources for protected areas. You can't just depend on tourism. But I think COVID also showed a shift in the market. First of all, the importance of the domestic market became very prominent. And in general, I think there's a shift towards nature-based tourism. More people want to be in nature. They don't want to be indoors. So I think we're going to see a growth in the nature-based tourism market, which is an opportunity really to both protect biodiversity, but also to promote economic growth. And I'll end by making a little pitch. We have a wonderful report, a second edition of our Tools and Resources for Nature-Based Tourism report. It has tons of information about all these different aspects of nature-based tourism. We are doing a seminar, GWP, on this coming Tuesday at 8 a.m. Please join to hear about this resource and also to hear from experts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Urvashi. And I really think also just occurred to me, be very interesting to link this effort that you're doing and the studies and the toolkit with our program, with global program with legislators at the GEF. Because as you mentioned, providing them with this information, these tools can be very powerful in terms to support the policies, the national policies. It's a suggestion, and let's work on that. Now I'm going to turn gears to a practitioner from one of our GWP countries, Malaysia, who is applying these ideas, into a project on nature-based tourism. Ramli, really good to have you with us today. And if you could share with us, some of these things that you're initiating in Malaysia on the benefit sharing activities that will help incentivize the communities to protection of orangutans and in the protection of its habitat, and this kind of having protecting the asset, as Urvashi was mentioned. Please.
Thank you very much. When the first backdrop came out, if you notice, there's a photo that just clicked my mind. It's a photo of the pangolin. Exactly. And Malaysia, Sarawak especially, has stepped up on the enforcement of illegal wildlife trade. And earlier this year, one person, not the citizens, was fined $11 million with the possession of scales, 5,200 scales. Now, our fine is not that big, but it's 10,000 per animal or part of, and the judge has claimed that that's one animal, every scale is one offense, so he got $11 million in fine. That gives a huge message now to everyone, say, look, the judge are stepping up. And this is where we come from. We are the enforcer of wildlife and the protected area. And what I'm saying, another one is that the value of this asset in nature is not much. The person who might caught the pangolin might sell it for $10 or $20. So this is very, very important. How would one protect that asset. And I believe that this is why the project of GWP is very important in protecting the asset, especially the orangutan in Borneo. Now, let me introduce you our orangutan, basically the big ape. In Borneo, there are 3 such species of orangutan. In the north, Borneo, in Sabah and up to North Kalimantan, you have the Moreira, Bongo Pygmaeus Moreira, and down in the Indonesian Kalimantan, you have the Wombai. And on our side, together with Kalimantan, on West Borneo, we have the population of Bongo Pygmaeus pygmaeus. And we have one area, which huge area of more than 10,000 square kilometer. And on our side, confidently, we are saying that we have about 1,800 to 2,000 orangutan and of good viable population. All is fine over there, but I'm going to bring you to another side where there are remnants of orangutan left. These are the area that we are interested in because there are a few of orangutan, but still there are 3 national parks, all sort of isolated with oil palm plantation in between. And how do you get the connectivity? And this is where we work with the oil palm owners. We work with the community around this area, and I guess it has been working well. We have formed a lot of committees. We have done a lot of, with the community, we have done a lot of training. Over the COVID, we have done a lot of training just to prepare that, hey, tourism can come in. We have experience on the other side of Sarawak where orangutan-based tourism has been in place for so many years. So we want to bring that experience into this area. Watching orangutan in the wild is like watching the rhinoceros in Masai Mara or Serengeti or something like that, which is, you want to go there but not a lot of people will go there. But in this area, the people are so intertwined with the culture. Orangutan is part of that culture. So, and it's nice to bring this culture together and bring, tourism in. And you're not just going to see the orangutan, if you can, but you're going to learn about the relationship between people and nature. This is very, very important.
Thank you so much, Humbly. I recently had the privilege to visit the gorillas in Rwanda, so I imagine it's a very similar experience to the ones that you're making for the orangutans. But can you, it's really important in a sense of this involvement with the community and really how Malaysia can harness this benefits from nature-based tourism. And could you have already some lessons learned that you share with us on this community engagement? Can you expand on that? And how you can benefit from these multiple uses, or how you adapting the structures that you're preparing for this nature-based tourism to the culture you mentioned? How you planning to do that, or how are you already doing it? Thank you.
Yeah, we have a few experience that we have, and that we want to bring to this area, because this area have not seen any tourism yet. But in one area where we have done it, we have worked. First of all, tourism is not simple. It's a complex thing. It's fluid. It's dynamic. You need this synergy between the local people and the tourism industry, the agent, the ministry, the government. you have to pull all your resources together. We have in this area, we were working with tour operators, and they set up a homestay program or a chalet dedicated to people wanting to see the orangutan, and the local people will provide the F&B, the transportation, the guides, and just not just servicing, but interacting with the tourists that come in, and with the aim is when they see that this is the asset, the benefit that they get, then they in turn will protect that asset. That's what we wanted, So instead of going out to get your pangolin for a few dollars to kill it, but in a sense that if you get more money from tourism that come in and to see the pangolin in the reality, that would be a great asset. And I think that's what we are working on, just to get the people on our side so that they can get the benefit. In turn, the protected area and us especially would get the benefit because people are on our side. The biggest challenge that we have experienced is to get the local people to protect and together the area, because they always say, when always the first thing that happened when we wanted to protect an area and said, oh, we are not going to get any benefit from protecting the area. We're going to lose our right, we're going to lose our privileges, we're going to lose our resources. But after a while, when they see there's a benefits that outweigh that perception, there'll be more and more of them supporting you. And I have that experience really once when I sat down with them and I said, Ramli, could we have more area protected? And said, but you were the one who did not want it to protect in the first place, to make it smaller. And said, yeah, that was then. Now the oil palm is coming in. We need more area to be protected. Extension. So we're going to go for more extension. We're going to go for more connectivity. And the local people are there on board with us.
Thank you so much. This is one of the strengths of the GWP program, is this sharing of knowledge and these models globally of these different types of initiatives adapted to the local realities and the local communities. I invite you all to look at our website for the studies, the information, the nature, the tourism study, and these initiatives on how to bring. And just as a final note, I think it's highly important, this aspect of the revenue and because in investing that the community can relate to such flagship species to the increase in the quality of life locally. So we also need to watch out for the investments done by the government, not only in the protected areas, but in the buffer areas, and also not only in environmental infrastructure, but also in health and education infrastructure, and how we can associate that with maintaining these beautiful landscapes, for attracting this type of these economies, for building these economies. So I'm really like to thank our panelists. We're running out of time. Hannah is going to talk to us about the new phase of the WCD impact program, and thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Adriana, and thank you to all of our panelists. This has been a super dynamic super dynamic set of panels. We won't stay for a question and answer discussion because we realize that people have other engagements to get to. We do very much encourage you to stay, get comfortable at the pavilion now and over the next week when we're here and continue the conversation. So I just put up on the slide here. Please do email us if you're interested in getting the newsletter and any updates from the Global Wildlife Program. As we have mentioned in GEF 8, we do have the Wildlife Conservation for Development Integrated Program, which is an exciting evolution growing out of GWP. The World Bank is the lead agency for that. And part of the evolution is really looking at this healthy planet, healthy people framework. And part of that is looking at the human, wildlife, and zoonotic disease transmission nexus there. So we're really excited to build that program together. And GEF party countries are very much welcome to express their interest in the Wildlife Conservation for Development Integrated Program, and that is happening early 2023. So we're really excited about that. So please do reach out. I also have some limited paper brochures that you're welcome to either take one back with you or read it and just leave it here, and we will pass it on. So without further ado, thank you everybody for joining us for this really exciting panel. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you very much to the GWP team at the World Bank specifically. They have worked so hard for 3 panels today at the GEF Pavilion, and we really thank you. Panelists, come to the stage. Panelists, we need a photo.